fathers and pastors, my brothers and sisters, fellow victims, fellow advocates, mga kasama. In July 5, 2011, just over a month ago, the Supreme Court ordered the Armed Forces of the Philippines to produce my son Jonas. The news should have brought joy and rejoicing to the family and to the friends of Jonas. But you know, all our reactions were the same. While deep in our hearts we wanted to be happy, we knew that it was a useless exercise. And indeed, the day after the ruling was released, and it was released late afternoon, the day after, I already read in the newspapers a response from the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and it said, the AFP cannot produce somebody whose whereabouts they don't know. We already knew this was going to be the reaction. Just recently, the Supreme Court also ordered the Armed Forces of the Philippines to surface and release Sherlyn Cadapan and Karen Empeño. The same denial from the AFP was the honor response to the Supreme Court order. Ang tanong, gano'n na lang ba ito? Eh, paano naman yung mga naghahanap? On August 22, the hearing with Balyaga, then First Lieutenant, now a Major, who was identified as the one who headed the team who abducted Jonas as respondent, will commence. How this will end, I can almost predict. While we win the case, and maybe Balyaga would be a fall guy and would be jailed, I will still not have my son beside me. There is so much distrust, there is so much distress, distrust, distress, and heartache. Even if you know that you win your case in courts. And why? Because of that weak word staring at you, impunity. That we have gone through the avenues of the justice system available to us throughout the more than 4 years that Jonas has been missing is testimony that there remains the minutest element of respect for the system. But even that is being slowly eroded. And to think that the case of Jonas is moving fast according to observers. We can imagine how the families of other victims feel as their cases drag in court. However, even as we go through the slow, seemingly deliberate, long drawn-out process of the justice system, we have this feeling that soon, very soon, patience would run out. This feeling not of impatience really, but of exasperation, and that is an understatement, is inflamed by the continuous occurrence of violations of human rights. Ang dami pa rin pinapatay, ang dami pa rin nawawala. And as I sit beside Marie of KARAPATAN, sabi niya, ang nireport ng KARAPATAN ay very conservative. Yun lang na meron silang facts at information. Mas marami pa doon ang hindi na i-report. We who are here in this hall all agree that there has to be a stop to all of this. But while we demand that government through the law enforcers do their duty to protect civilians, in the same breath, we fear for our safety when we see uniformed men around. Ako mismo, hindi naman ako ganon. Dati natutuwa ako pag may mga pulis at naka-uniforme sa may bahay. Ngayon, pag nakakita ko na may uniform, kinakabahan na ako. Baka pati ako dukutin. Because it has been happening that our house is being surveilled and that I am being followed around. The one word again that explains these crimes, again I say, is staring at you, impunity. No ifs and no buts, extralegal killings and forced disappearances, tortures and all the accompanying consequences of disappearances and killings will always be wrong. They will always be a sin. They will always be a crime. And yet, why is it that mainstream conscience has not been touched? Why is it that society as a whole, the greater number of Filipinos, do not condemn these things as evil? Could it be that we who fight this evil have failed to go beyond the ideology of either the left or the right? And when what is at stake is somebody's ideology and not justice, it is easy to walk away from this with a clear conscience. Pag sinasabi kong ako ang nanay ni Jonas, kasi madalas nakikilala naman tayo, sabihin nila, kaya naman pala inabduct yung anak mo, kasi ganito yung sinabi nila. As if anybody could be abducted for whatever reason. Kasi dinidikit na nila ng ideology. In the search and in my association in families of victims who are victims themselves, I discovered that most of the victims lived such selfless lives. You know, I even intend to write something like, Knowing Jonas without Jonas. Kasi unti-unti kong na-discover kung ano ang ginagawa niya nung umaalis siya sa amin. Tumutulong pala siya sa iba-ibang communities. Yung mga hindi niya nagagawa sa bahay, mag-ayos na mga kuryente, maglagay ng poso para sa mga bata, pag-tutor, ginagawa niya pala at unti-unti ko na-discover yun. The one motivation that propelled them, the victims, to do what they did was to help their country, their fellow Filipinos, and to reform an unjust system. By their very existence, they compelled society to reflect and examine their own lives. This scrutiny, of course, cannot be tolerated by the uniformed forces, for it will reveal that the victims possessed what they regrettably lacked, and that is a selfless offering of oneself, of one's life, of one's love to the others. For us who come to join this conference, we should divest ourselves of any baggage in our hearts. To continue to carry this baggage would dilute and make impure and corrupt our motives. Anger, hatred, revenge. These are the kinds of baggages I am talking about. Anger and revenge should only bring tears and rage, and that would blur our vision and divert our focus. Why must motivations be untainted? Why must desires and goals be in the spirit of charity and the zeal for the good of the majority? That is because even if the laborers labor, unless God builds, all our efforts will be to naught. Sayang, kung hindi malinis ang ating hangarin, at yan ay hindi bigyan ng basbas, the building will not be built. If you want to penetrate mainstream conscience, we must look at our own motives and the manner by which we work towards our goals. Let us check ourselves, and when our judgments transcend what is left and right and even the middle, and stop being simplistically ideological in our judgment, then we can move forward and demand that they listen to us, because we would have the moral ascendancy. I remember an interview on TV on the issue about Medeo Cruz's paintings and so-called art exhibit. I'm sure you've read about it in the newspapers. While I completely condemn the way that Medeo Cruz expressed his art, and I do not agree that that was right, I was stunned by the answer of somebody who was supposed to be a lay leader of the Catholic Church when he said, mag-ingat siyang lumabas, baka mapatay lang siya dyan sa labas. Kung ako lang makakakita sa kanya, ako unang papatay sa kanya. I was stunned. I honestly believe that this ongoing campaign waged in the guise of fighting terrorism, yet uses violence is evil. We cannot believe that peace is the objective of any endeavor that uses violence as a strategy. Thus, we too must remember that if we are trying to put an end to impunity, which fosters violations of human rights, we must ourselves, imperfect as we are, use the way of peace. Characterized by a determined determination, we must bring our voices to the bigger community of nations, and the lamentations of the just will be heard by our fellow just. Each and every one of us in this room have the power to contribute, the power to give his little worth to end impunity in various ways according to the God-given talents or developed capacities. We should do what we must to end impunity. While some are best at doing bigger jobs, carrying heavier responsibilities, others like me, ordinary mortals, can just be simply good Samaritans, and that would be enough. The Samaritan not only stopped along the way to help a victim, he went an inch farther by cleaning up the wounds and placing oil on the wounds. And then he went another step further by bringing this victim to an inn and giving him refuge. And yet he extended himself by making sure that the man would be taken care of by paying for whatever he would consume and promising to pay kung magkautang. And yet nowhere in the story of the Good Samaritan can we see that the Samaritan asked for the name of the victim. Nowhere in the story can we see that he categorized the victim as, ay, ito kasama ko. Ay, ito ay kaibigan ko. He did not label nor categorize. Considering the time and the place where Jonas was abducted, I can safely say that easily there were probably 100 witnesses. And yet, as Jonas shouted for help, not one person intervened. If one or two bystanders simply asked the abductors what was going on, maybe I would not have a missing son. A year after the abduction, while I was at the lobby of the House of Representatives, one of the janitors approached me and told me, "Ma'am, nakita ko pang dinudugot, nakita ko pong kinakalagkan si Jonas doon sa Ever. Kasi doon po ako janitor noong panahon na yun." So I asked him to describe the abduction, and he did. And he said that Jonas was shouting at the top of his voice, pleading to everyone to help him. This young boy, I think not more than 19 years old, told me that even to that day when we talked, a year after the abduction, he would be haunted by dreams of my son's bleeding eyes. And he asked me, "Ma'am, pasensya na po, talagang hindi po ako nakatulog." It is not enough that we pray that this evil would leave. But yes, we must pray and pray with all our hearts. And our merciful Father will hear our pleas. But as we all know, faith without good works is just like an empty gong. It's all sound, no substance. Teresa of Avila, the founder of the Discalced Carmelites, always said, "The fruit of prayer is good works, and good works." And if the good work is authentically good, it should bring us back to prayer. And even to the naive, to us who do not understand the dynamics of society and all this violence, it is easy to see that the government has failed in its duty to ensure that an environment that is safe for those who stand in their beliefs would be given us. It is therefore time for us to do something, to do good works. It will always be the appropriate time every time there is something that happens. We must take an active hand because we do not want our children and the grandchildren and my Jonas's daughter to experience what we are experiencing. Remember the parable where the story where A man approached Jesus and told him that his son was possessed by devils, and that the devil would fling this boy in fire and water and hurt the boy. And Jesus asked him, kailan pa ba siyang ganyan? Sabi ng tatay, matagal na po, bata pa siyang may nakasalib na sa kanyang masamang espiritu. And then the father asked Jesus, if you can, please heal him. And Jesus said to him, if you can, all things are possible to him who believes. Immediately, the father of the child cried out and said, I believe. Help my unbelief. Do we believe that we can do something to end impunity? We have no business being here if we do not. The Lord help our unbelief.